My name is Gabriela Balcarce. I'm a non-binary person. I'm a lesbian as well. And I wanted to talk about non-hegemonic feminism, some Latin American contributions. So the slides are exactly the text because I wanted to share exactly what I wanted to say, and my English is not so perfect because I'm not bilingual. So here's the text. In recent times of trembling and complexity for human and non-human living beings, the search for no modern perspectives and experiences by the humanities and social sciences threw us into the challenge of addressing and learning from alternatives, that is, other ways of living, whose natural, cultural, spiritual world is found in a different intertwining to those of hegemonic enunciation in our disciplinary fields. These hegemonies have been possible due to efficacy of colonialism inherent in our academic formations, whose authorizations have not given rise, and philosophy is perhaps one of the key examples, to those other voices and lives that do not correspond to the anthropocentrism in our humanities. The classic distinction between nature and culture, so dear to the emergence of the humanities, whose defense was always within an agreed and indubitable epistemological paradigm, has led to the consecration of a distance that today is presented as a difficult task to overcome from our schemes of academic thinking. On the other hand, these perspectives have a lot to teach us, and in more ways than one, regarding the idea practices and experiences, even dreams of good living. It is in these two senses that I will be interested in advancing in the analysis of this presentation, that is, in the ways of presenting their discourses and activism against terricide, as well as the idea of good living, and the way in which spirituality appears there linked to the world of matter, techne, and ancestors. It is difficult to write a text without admitting the colonialism that crosses me as a person belonging to the academic world of the city of Buenos Aires. However, the motivation, the political gesture of appealing to inheritance, philosophy is a task of inheritance because we are finite beings, and to hospitality as an ontological condition, that is, as the patenting of those others that always were there. It should urge us to question the traditions in which we have been formed, deniers of the indigenous and of so many others silenced, assimilated, annihilated, that besiege these places, generating in recent times an effect of spectral condensation in front of the danger of the present. For philosophy to enter in a more situated coordinates, it is extremely important to focus on the conflict that persists and is renewed between the original people, they call original, and financial speculation, which manages to break a nation state that is said to be pluriversal, but it's a shame of the blood that runs through their glands. This text is not an invitation to embrace the natural world from a kind of step backwards in which nature acquires the notes of a certain essentialism or physis, reinforcing archaic schemes of romanticization of the natural world, but from the hybridization that favors other thoughts and other materials, where the classic dichotomies lose their meaning: agency / passivity, essence / existence, nature / culture, among others. Furthermore, this view of the natural world corresponds to one more idealization within the schemes of a profoundly modern thought. It is in this sense that anthropological and ethnographic work warn us of what we always knew, how the European tradition, is a quote of Viveiros de Castro, the European tradition does not hold neither in fact nor in law the monopoly of thought. Perhaps it is time to rethink these distinctions even more, to ask ourselves what the need for this separation responds to. Faced with these questions, in our case, from philosophy, the epistemological expansion is valuable and corresponds to that necessary task of inheritance of the territory, of the body's territory, of the inheritance that always happen, even if it's not to written or hear, as claim of infinite justice. Wow. De movimiento Mujeres Indígenas y Diversidades Indígenas por el Buen Vivir was assembled in 2018 and was preceded by another strike, the strike of originally women in the region of the Toba community in Rosario, Argentina, and emerged in Epuyén 2 years later. Mapuches, Huichí, Quom, and Guaraníes, among other communities, denounced gender violence that culminates in femicides against elderly women and adolescents. Environmental issues are also on the agenda, exposing contamination by transnational companies of both bodies and ecosystems. As a result of their mobilization, a primarily project was undertaken for the foregrounded the involvement of the Organization of Women and Anti-Patriarchal Diversities from the regions 36 indigenous nations. Their main concerns were shared matters such as open pit mining, fracking, clear cutting, agrochemical dams, floods, lack of drinking water, disease, destructive state, the absence of state, and the hunger. Recently, these women have held interdisciplinary meetings with activists, land defenders, and social organizations in order to jointly question preservation and protect measures for these different ways of living in the region that do not always respond to the imposed one. In this dialogue, some of the topics addressed included a diet based on carob flour derived from a tree that is not usually part of the Western cuisine, the link between community and the land and rivers, and the use of non-Spanish languages. In addition to these issues, some community members have had to deal with economic crisis and policies imposed on the territories in question, causing them to abandon the place where they were born or be displaced to the suburbs of big cities in precarious conditions where they suffer discrimination. Priorities are never in line with those who are not part of the hegemonic ways of living, those that today globalization shapes, generating an homogeneous and docile population. Inheritors of the indigenous genocide, these women have held interdisciplinary meetings in recent years, as I said, with activists, land defenders, and other organizations to think about preservation and contamination, offering perspective and experience of different ways of living and cohabiting that occur in the region and not respond to the ways imposed by the colony. As a result of this meeting, a document was drawn up that denounces the growing terricide in which the acute ecological political reading of those who see more closely the way in which the planet is devastated in highlight. It is important to highlight here the closeness of certain contemporary diagnoses by geologists, specialists in Earth system, and others which have been named in different ways: Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Plantationocene, 6 mass extinction of species, etc. Although there is no agreement on the names nor on the dating of the origin or deepening of this environmental crisis on global scale, it is about the danger of the entire planet's biodiversity. In 2020, I had the opportunity to attend to the workshop Racism and Segregation in the Policies of Colonial State, given by Moira Millán from the Mapuche Nation. Subsequently, in 2021, the movement on indigenous and diversities for good living began to organize the workshops Makers of Good Living. In the first meeting, the conflict of the formation of the Argentinian national state in 1880s was addressed, which promoted the well-known campaign of the desert. This campaign consisted of the systematic extermination of the indigenous people. Hence, in the face of the euphemism represented by the appeal to the image of a journey through a desert place, which is often encouraged in schools when they teach us our history, we should talk about desert production in the light of a narrative of the wild and barbaric against European civilization. Displaced from their lands, those that since the arrival of the conqueror were distributed in the deceitful, forced and a performing gesture of generating a property title that they have never owned before. Precisely, the land is not appropriable. Moreover, permission is requested from the land to be able to extract fruits from it, or in the event that an animal is killed, it is used in its entirely, food, clothing, etc. There is no appropriation, but permanent contact. Everything is linked to the earth. There is a reciprocal link to the elements, says Evis Michan, also Mapuche. And that is why Teresa is also the extinction of entire people displacing their territories. Most of these women are bilingual intercultural teachers, although there are also tones in an incipient process of language recovery, as the case of Lule people. The stories, of course, are not the same for everyone. However, some elements can be highlighted as a common. The importance of spirituality as a way of living in community. Through different practices, dance, singing with a box, pottery, the presence of certain animals that imply contact with the ancestral, where the supernatural prevents the distinction between nature and humanist culture. Is the pottery and the manufacture of handicraft. There is a talk of work as spiritual shaping. Epistemology is built as a heterogeneous fabric of practice, cooking recipes, stories, songs, and dreams that break with the linearity of time in the dense fabric of ancestral memories. Far from the idea of comfort and solipsistic self-fascination, the good life or the good living bring us new questions and experiences, putting into contact what have been separated, embracing finitude and not in opposition to it, for the sake of thinking from an equality post-anthropocentric ontology. The theme of good living runs through the lands of Aviala. Aviala is the name, the indigenous name to call America, you know, tying together communities that teach us that the world beyond the human is not a world without meaning. So that's said Eduardo Kohn. Life and thought are not separated for good living. On the contrary, the modern gaze only insists on this separation to be able to appropriate life, even more so to dominate life from a single way of life that destroys any difference and despises which does not fit his epistemological demarcation criteria. The living epistemological polyphony seems to scare our degrees and our limited conception of science as a synonym of wisdom. The idea of enlightenment as disenchant of the world deepen our thoughts to the point that we apply this restriction to completely heterogeneous pluriverses such as animistic cosmologies. The need prevails to establish other coordinates and intertwine between matter and spirit and between living beings, human or not, as Kohn points out, appreciating what it might mean to live. In Quechua, causa, gnapa, in words that are open to what extends beyond the human could allow us become a little more of the world. Thank you so much.